Hi, I'm Karina Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we tell you what matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Now, several leading economists and academics have banded together to lobby and campaign for the scrapping of Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's supplementary budget, which painted a grim picture of South Africa's economic realities made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mboweni has been adamant that the country's debt-to-GDP ratio needs to be slashed, and unless public spending is brought under control, the country could face greater threats to its sovereignty when it is forced to go cap in hand to international lending institutions for financial relief. But not everyone agrees with Mboweni's remedies and way forward. To explain why they want to see the back of his plan, I'm joined by the co-director for the Institute for Economic Justice, Neil Coleman. Neil, thank you so much for joining us. Before I get into the substance of your submission, which you have made to Parliament to get the supplementary budgets scrapped, let's take a listen to a very intense conversation happening between Yunus Karim, who is, of course, the chair of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Finance, and the Treasurer General of the Treasury, Dondo Mohajani. And this is, of course, after he accused civil society organizations and yourselves of misleading the public in relation to your opposition to the supplementary budget.
From any DG. And quite frankly, I agree entirely with Kolo, and to a large extent with Floyd. It's not acceptable, DG. Yes, you must be robust, but you can't tell us as Parliament. That's outrageous, DG, that we shouldn't be misled and used. Who are we going to be used by? It applies equally to you, Treasury. You're not going to mislead us, we won't allow you to. You're not going to use us, we won't allow you to. So let's be clear. It's not a question of being robust. It's a question of you not telling Parliament what to do in respect of civil society. Actually, it's really outrageous. I honestly think your behavior today, and especially coming from you, frankly, because until now you've been known to be a very modest, soft person and conciliatory, so it took me by surprise personally. Okay, then to come to the other issues, right? Firstly, the thing that struck me, to what extent is the position set out in the budget reasonably consistent with that part, or is it over-reliant on the private sector to rescue us? Not that the private sector co-chairperson members is not crucial to our recovery. They're indispensable, but we need a relationship in the state and market that's appropriate to the current condition. On the issue, finally, of Economists Initiative, I've made a comment there, Comrade Chair, in the chat group. It's Gillard, is that how we say his name? He's unavailable today, he's sick apparently, but they said they will write their responses, and we plead with them to do so by this evening so that Zakene, Esther and the team can pull together a draft that the chairs can look at and forward to the committee as soon as possible.
That is, of course, Yunus Karim, the always outspoken chair of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Finance, talking very robustly to the Director General, Dondo Mohajani. Neil, for our viewers who perhaps haven't seen this clip, just take us to Parliament during last week. What exactly happened here? I understand this was public submissions that were, of course, made into the supplementary budget, and Treasury essentially accusing you guys of misleading the public.
Yeah, so thanks, Karima. The Budget Justice Coalition, which is a large coalition of civil society organizations, spends a lot of time, they dedicate all their time to going through the budget, to looking at the different elements of the package. They track it on an ongoing basis, and they made a comprehensive submission to the committee. And as you know, the group of what's called the Economists Initiative, which is about 120 economists and policy experts, had written a letter to Parliament taking the extraordinary step of calling on Parliament to reject the budget in its entirety, to send it back to the Minister of Finance and Cabinet for redrafting on the basis that it was, number one, not taking forward the stimulus package announced by the President, and number two, that it was embarking on very, very damaging austerity cuts. The Treasury then embarked on a smoke and mirrors exercise, accusing the coalition and the economists of misleading Parliament, and the chair got extremely angry because he indicated that it was not up to Treasury to dictate to Parliament as to how they should deal with these submissions. And in fact, if you look at what Treasury said to Parliament, in our view, they misled Parliament and the country. And we would be very happy to engage in a debate with the Minister on this platform, or the Director General on this platform, or any other platform, because we believe that what they've put forward to Parliament is in fact fundamentally incorrect. It misrepresents the fact that the stimulus package announced by the President has not been taken forward, and we've, as the Institute for Economic Justice, we've issued a document in which we break down in some detail why the rescue package has not been taken forward, and secondly, that there are cuts proposed to the budget over the next 2 to 3 years, which business economist Nazmira Mula estimates are around about 400 billion rand. And economist Duma Kabule says are up to 600 billion. Either way, they're around 10% of GDP, which are cuts which are almost equivalent to the stimulus package which the President had announced.
Okay,
so in
Neil,
fact, we're going in exactly the opposite direction of what the President had indicated.
Okay, just hold your thoughts there. The big question, of course, in terms of the divisions between yourselves and Treasury is whether this is in fact a stimulus package, whether there is an expansionary budget, and of course Treasury is saying that it is so. This morning in the Sunday Times, Peter Bruce describes you as the left, he calls himself the centre left, and he says Tito Mboweni, after seeing your plea that the budget be scrapped, was saying, you know, God help us, and he's saying that there's a massive fight coming in the governing party. From where you're sitting, do you think that your calls for a shift in the approach of Treasury is gaining momentum inside the African National Congress? Yunus Karim's fight with Dondo Mogajani, is that an indicator that Parliament isn't necessarily just going to be pliant when it comes to what the executive wants here?
Time will tell, Karima. The signs are very, very worrying that National Treasury has been able to sell a package to Cabinet which goes directly counter to what the President announced and directly counter to what countries are doing throughout the world to try and rescue their economies from the crisis. So this is no time to play politics. I think, you know, when Gilad Isaac spoke to Parliament, he said, look, we are desperate. We are really worried that the country is facing economic suicide, that if we embark on this package, we are going to be in a situation where there is going to be no third phase. You remember the President announced that there would be 3 phases, the initial rescue, and then the stabilization of the economy, and then a recovery phase. There will be no recovery phase because we are heading into a deep depression, which is a hole that the country will not be able to get out of, which is why the economists called for the rejection of the budget and for Cabinet to go back to the drawing board. Because what we are seeing is a situation in which businesses are collapsing, households are facing desperate circumstances. The Department of Social Development estimates that food parcels, for example, have only reached 12% of the people that they need to reach. If we look at the employer relief scheme, the number of workers who've received relief is a small fraction of those who need it.
Neil, just hold your thoughts there. One of the big reasons why government is sounding the alarm is the question of the debt ratio to GDP. And a lot of traditional or mainstream economists, of course, latch onto this. In your submission, you talk about hysteria over the debt crisis and that it is exaggerated. But is it really? I mean, the fundamental truth here is that we are living above our means. We are spending money that we just don't have.
No, Karima, you know, it's a very common fallacy that conservatives in Treasury and financial economists try to peddle, which is that a country's economy is like a household, and therefore if you don't have the resources, you can't spend them. Every country borrows. The issue is not about borrowing. The issue is about what you do with the borrowing, about investing it in productive assets, about investing it in people and infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So the question of the debt hysteria, which the minister is trying to whip up, is that he's trying to distract attention from the fundamental issues, which is that if we continue on this trajectory, we are going to move into a terrain which is absolutely unimaginable, of 50% unemployment, massive hunger, widespread poverty. These are the targets that the ministers should be addressing, not the question of debt. Basically, what governments around the world have said is we are going to do what it takes. We will borrow to the extent that we need to rescue our economies. And once our economy starts growing again, then that growth will enable us to repay the debt. What you do by slashing spending and reducing the size of the economy is, in fact, you increase debt because your GDP shrinks. Remember, debt is a ratio. It's a percentage of debt to GDP, which is the size of the economy. And currently what we're looking at, with the failure to implement the President's rescue package, Intellidex estimates that the size of the contraction of our economy will probably be about 16%. Now, that is not what Peter Bruce calls the left. That is a business think tank, and that's very broadly shared by Business for South Africa and other organizations who have modeled the impact of this on the economy. So we are talking about a massive depression in the economy, which can only be dealt with by counter-cyclical investment. And 36 billion rand, or less than 1% of GDP, is simply not going to do anything to rescue our economy.
All right, Neil, let's take a short break. When we come back, we talk about a possible constitutional challenge to Mboweni's plans. Don't go anywhere.